Hi, I'm Rebecca Greenfield. I'm an editor and reporter at Bloomberg overseeing our equality coverage. I'm also the co host of the Paycheck podcast, which is this season just started about the racial wealth gap in the US, co hosted by me and Bloomberg senior executive editor Jackie Simmons. I'm so excited to have our panelists here today who I'd like to introduce. We have Cherie Blair, the founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, Sanda Ojiambo, the CEO and executive director of the UN Global Compact, and Carolyn Tastad, Group President, North America, P&G. And for disclosure, P&G is a sponsor of the Bloomberg Equality Summit. Thanks so much for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about the plight of women a year after COVID, a year give or take, has really devastated women's employment and economic fortunes around the world. And I think before, there's so many statistics that we could point to showing all these things. There's one statistic in the US that hit me particularly hard in September. 800,000 plus women left the workforce, and it really hasn't improved since then. And so I think it's really important that we're talking about this because it's a huge problem for so many people and the global economy. So before we get in, I want to, to kind of demonstrate how kind of layered and complex this is, and there's so many different things happening that those big statistics can't show us, is pull up a Twitter poll that Bloomberg did recently. And so they asked women or people, if you're a working woman, have you ... And you can see lost your job, working less, earning less, nothing has changed. So we basically have a huge proportion of people who, in one way or another, have had their economic lives change. And I think lost your job is a big part. A lot of people responded to that, but we can also see there's other things going on, like working less or earning less. And there's a big proportion who say nothing has changed, but that's still a big number of people. So I think I want to start by asking each of you, and I think you each bring a really different perspective on this, of kind of where, from your vantage point, where do we stand? And I'll start with Carolyn, who can give us, what I think maybe the white collar worker is facing, and what you see going on, in your world and at P&G for women, working women.
Thanks, Rebecca. Certainly, and those statistics are compelling. As a result of COVID, we do know that gender equality has taken a step back. And unfortunately, we see this time and time again in downturns and disasters throughout history. Women bear a heavy cost, right? More of the jobs lost, more of the frontline care, and often more of the burden at home. And so at P&G, we are committed to equality, right? And our commitment starts with an equal workplace. Our aspiration at our company is 50-50 at every level, 40% multicultural representation in the U.S., and during this pandemic, we've been very determined to step forward, not back. So we've embraced remote and flexible work, not just for now, but for the long run. And our intention all the way through this pandemic has been to operate with an abundance of flexibility mindset, really recognizing that every individual circumstances are unique, and we have to really cater to that. We've adjusted policies and benefits to meet real-time needs, providing pay continuity for employees that weren't able to work due to COVID-19, offering emergency loans, COVID testing, PPE, not only for our employees, but their families, really reinforced our family and child care support benefits. In fact, we launched our global parental leave policy during the pandemic, offering a minimum of 8 weeks paid leave for all parents, which is, again, a big step in shifting cultural norms and making sure that we are recognizing that parenting has no gender. We also really very focused on providing free access to mental health and wellness programs and many, many more things. And then, of course, during this time, we've continued to be very intentional about our focus on talent development, right? Making sure that that doesn't get left behind, and we pair that with a very high accountability to deliver the targets that we've set for ourselves. So importantly, during the pandemic, starting with our own employees, but also I'm very, very proud of our brand teams, our brands, the brand platforms, their voice. They have continued to step forward and advance equality during this time. Again, this focus for us in all of our efforts and all of the actions we're taking is stepping forward. So whether it's always with their focus on period poverty and ensuring that all girls have access to period products so they can stay in school, be in school, continue their education, whether it's Secret working on pay equality and wealth equality, whether it's Pampers focusing on all parents being part of bringing a new child into the home and nurturing them. And just in the last month, our Dawn and Swiffer teams have launched an entire campaign called Come Clean to Close the Chore Gap, recognizing that, again, in this pandemic, what we've seen, 65% of all household chores tend to be done by one person in the home, and it tends to be the woman. And so the whole focus has been on everybody working together, the entire family, let's come clean, let's close the chore gap, and really see the positive impact of all families working together, both in the home and, leisurely, and just staying together in this really remarkable time that we're all going through. So great work happening, but so important. The actions have to be focused on moving forward and not letting us take a step back.
Cherie, I see you pointing to yourself with the chore gap. Yeah, I think we're all just doing so many more chores. I know my house is getting dirtier. But you're bringing up a major problem, which is that the pandemic has completely exploded the way that we live, and mainly it means way more childcare, and that's falling disproportionately on women. And we know that's partly why we're seeing such big shifts in the labor market, especially here in the US. I'm wondering, Cherie, I know your organization just put out a big report on women entrepreneurs, which is a slightly different segment. Is that mainly also what you're seeing, and why you're seeing some losses there? Or can you go into the report and tell us what you found?
I'd be delighted. Before I do, I just wanted to respond. Yeah. I'm not surprised that 50% of more of your Twitter poll said things hadn't changed. And I don't think so much things have gone backwards during the pandemic. I actually think the pandemic has exposed the actual stark reality of the two shifts that women have been doing, not just during the pandemic, but before the pandemic. And because so many women are only just about coping, when, as you say, things like childcare collapses, or whatever other arrangements they have that enable them to balance their work and life are put under. It's such a fragile balance that the slightest thing can really turn it down. Now, Procter & Gamble, P&G, they're known for being a family-friendly firm, so not surprised that they have responded. But the reality is, for many, many female workers around the world, family-friendly is not what they're experiencing. And I think many women, as a result of that, have actually voted with their feet and have gone into setting up their own businesses, working from home, doing their own thing, because at least in that way, they can organize their lives in the way that suits them. But you're right, of course, setting up your own business does not make you immune from this global economic crisis, because as well as the global health crisis, COVID-19 is obviously an economic crisis. And so we did a survey of women who are in our programs, and also some who weren't. About 2/3 of them were in our programs currently, to find out how women entrepreneurs in low and middle income countries were coping with the crisis and what impact it has made. And we published it just before International Women's Day. And so what we found, and you're not going to be surprised to hear, is that most of them, actually a staggering 83.8%, said that the pandemic had had a negative impact on their business. And 78% of them also said, just like the women in the States that we've just been talking about, that COVID had had an impact on their roles and responsibilities in the household. And they didn't mean that their husbands were stepping up to the plate either, or their partners. And actually, the crisis for small and medium-sized enterprises, which are, after all, the backbone of an economy and the backbone of development, nearly 4 in 10 of our respondents said that their businesses will or may have to close as a result. And I suspect that's an underreporting because, as I say, 2/3 of the women in our survey were working with us in our programs. And in this last year, we have done a huge amount of pivoting to help the women that we're working with deal with, how do you work online? How do you pivot your business to take into account the challenges of COVID-19? How do you build resilience? And 1 in 10 of the women told us that COVID-19 pandemic was the single greatest challenge they had ever faced. And when you think we're talking about women, who have faced power outrages in their businesses, who have poor economic conditions, poor social conditions, political turmoil in some of these countries. The fact that 1 in 10 said that COVID was the single greatest challenge, I think just illustrates what I'm saying, that COVID is that, we have a saying, the last straw that broke the camel's back. So many women are just in this delicate balance, and something like COVID really puts everything out of kilter. Now, that's not to say that obviously there aren't things that can be done, and we're certainly working on that as a foundation. But I think we have to start from the realistic prospect, which isn't that COVID has suddenly created a situation that was difficult. I think that COVID has exposed the underlying difficulties and made us, everybody realize, whether you're self-employed in your own business or an employer looking at how do we make a more inclusive workplace, that things have to change if we're really going to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, tap into the $5 trillion bonus to the world economy that would be if women were able to participate as economic actors in the economy. I mean, there are so many things we're missing out on, and I'm hoping that though we seem to have a temporary step back, that this COVID will actually accelerate the move to change the way we work, to reflect the realities of how people live across the globe in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that is the hope. I'm glad that you brought.
By the way, it's just a hope. We cannot allow it to go back. And when we see, the great women we've got on this panel, when we think of all the great women we know, this is not a time for us to say, okay, guys, we'll retreat back into the home. And by the way, that's the other thing that our survey was showing, these stereotypes about what women should be doing, and, it's better that they're at home, and, men in many of the countries where, men don't like women who are successful, all these stereotypes, we've been fighting them, and we are going to eradicate them.
Yeah. Sanda, I'm wondering if you can give us a bigger global picture of what's going on, and if there's any variation in certain places, or what we're seeing in different parts of the world globally, from your vantage point.
Thank you. And, I want to build on what the two previous speakers have said. I think it's very clear that COVID has exposed fragilities that existed before. And it's great to see companies like P&G stand up and take really progressive action and really seizing this moment to set up a system for the future. But the fact is, from a global perspective, women have probably been most disproportionately affected by the pandemic. And whereas we may primarily have spoken about the economic impact, there's certainly first the impact on education, there's the impact on health, and there's the impact on general health, well-being. Cherie just spoke earlier about the fact that this is a great opportunity to move forward. And as we move forward, a lot of countries are, implementing economic stimulus packages that I think are great. But attention truly needs to be paid to the fact that these stimulus packages must have a gender-sensitive lens. We do need to understand that women may not necessarily be in the forefront of the macroeconomy, but women certainly drive a lot of the microeconomy. Women have a great impact on what happens within the household, what happens within community. And unless social protection systems are restored and strengthened, women will continue to remain out of where the economic stimulus packages are going and out of the opportunity to truly build forward better. I do want to highlight, I think, one of the most probably sensitive and less spoken about areas that I think COVID has had an impact, which is on education. Millions of girls around the world have lost out on an education at this point in time. We're facing the threat of a possible lost generation. And I think that whereas we might look forward as to how we can rebuild economies, due consideration truly has to be given to what happens to younger people who might not be in the economic sphere right now, but are missing out on the opportunity to do so in the future. We did a survey of companies in the Global Compact, and it was stated that just 31% of them have been able to take forward-looking steps to really mitigate against the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. So it's very clear that there's a lot to be done, but all of this in the full cognizance of the fact that it's few businesses that have been able to remain resilient and steady and forward-looking through COVID. So there really needs to be a rethink about what this new, global economy, the new business movement will look like to make sure that it's truly inclusive and truly diverse. It's been called a reset. I think it's time for a really good rethink around social protection systems, diversity, inclusion, and truly what the workplace of the future looks like, both from the perspective of a large multinational, but down to how you can support and, cushion and build resilience into the SME sector as well.
I want to ask you a follow-up question about something you said with stimuluses that have been passed. Have you seen any that do have this gender lens, or what are some things that you would like to see countries do to specifically look at this from a woman and female entrepreneur perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I'll highlight, one instance. I wrote about it in a recent piece, which was the state of Hawaii that has actually taken a very gender-sensitive approach to its building forward better perspective. And it's demonstrated that it is possible to take, gender-focused considerations into perspective. But I do think that, plans are great. Where the rubber meets the road for me is when financing is actually aligned, have leadership commitment, and where you're able to truly integrate these rebuild plans into national development plans so that they're not parallel, but they're part of what the future of the economy and the countries would be. Obviously, the business sector plays a key role in this rebuild, and it's always important to have business sectors sit along with with the government, with civil society and the UN agencies. This rebuild, especially as far as it concerns gender, has to be multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder as well.
Sarah, you're so right. It's interesting to say about what you said about access to finance, because it's a big key for the SME sector as well. And the interesting thing our survey showed was that over a third of the women said it's their biggest challenge getting access to finance. And when we asked them where do they get their finance on, nearly 80% of them had an investment in their business, but 2/3 of that came from their own resources. And time again, it's either themselves or their families and friends, women entrepreneurs, not taken seriously by the financial institutions, from the smallest woman at the market to the big woman seeking venture capital. This happens time and time again. Only 15% of our respondents had secured an investment or loan from a bank, and only 6% had from a financial service company. If these businesses that are part of the wheels of the economy are ignoring the particular needs of women, not taking women entrepreneurs seriously, then you end up with women having to rely on their own resources, on unofficial sources of money, and their businesses are not contributing in the way they could. Sorry, I interrupt you.
No, thank you. I just wanted to jump onto that same thing. There's so much opportunity for companies to do more to help in this. And we talk about this so much at our company. We see this as a common agenda, not a competitive agenda. There is so much we can do together to have a bigger impact. And we work with long-standing partners who we believe by bringing our resources, and their capabilities together, our impact is amplified by pulling together and doing things, again, together through partners. And, I love this conversation. We have focused our effort in two areas. One is enhancing girls' access to education, because we know it's foundational. The second one is enabling women's economic opportunity and ensuring we can lift financial independence for both women and girls. And I love the conversation about women entrepreneurs. We partner with We Connect International, with UN Women in dozens of countries, really, to provide training and support for women entrepreneurs to grow their businesses. And today, I think we spend somewhere between $1.5 billion, $1.3 billion in our own value chain on women-led and women-owned businesses. And we're committed to make women-owned businesses, women-led businesses, a very growing part of our supply chain. It's really important, the work that companies can do, the position that businesses the stand that we can take, the action that we can move forward. And it's so, so important for the advancement of equality. And there are so many other great examples. Our ventures group, talking about the access to capital, we have a ventures team in our company, and we're working very closely with women entrepreneurs and making sure that we can advance their ideas and the great innovation that comes from those brilliant minds. So there's so much we can do. I guess my plea would be for all companies to get on board, for all companies to contribute, for all companies to use their resources, their voices, their platforms to advance equality. And again, I will go back to our base point. This is a common agenda for all of us. This is good for everybody. If we think about the SDGs and the economic impact it can have, we need to continue thinking of this as a common agenda, not a competitive one.
I think that's a perfect segue to my next question for Sanda, which is, you work with companies to get them on board with this. Can you talk about the 10 principles and the ways that you kind of get companies to commit to this and what you ask them to do?
Absolutely. So the UN Global Compact espouses what we call our 10 principles for responsible business. And these principles really are focused on human rights, labor rights, the environment or climate, and anti-corruption. And, if you look at those principles, certainly gender is at the heart of a lot of human rights issues, as it is at the heart of a lot of labor rights issues. I also want to single out the women's empowerment principles, a set of tools that we co-developed with UN Women a couple of years ago that we feel are especially responsive and robust to addressing some of the gender concerns that we've talked about through the COVID pandemic and beyond. I think the two sets of principles, the 10 principles as well as the women empowerment principles, provide a firm, forward-looking agenda for businesses to adopt to really transform gender perspectives in the workplace, in the marketplace, and in the community. They're very robust. And again, going back to, building forward after COVID, I think it's important, yes, to do the immediate response and make sure that we do the right things. But I think it's also important to lay a principle-led approach to what we do, such that this transition is purpose-driven, it's sustainable, and it helps build resilience. And so our 10 principles of the Global Compact and the Women's Empowerment Principles are great tools for companies to be able to adopt for this.
What are some of the most, oh yeah, go ahead, Cherie.
I was going to say, I'd like to say something about which everyone watching this could do, and that is that we have a mentoring program, which is an online global mentoring program for women entrepreneurs in over 100 different countries, where we ask our mentors, we train our mentors, and then men and women give up to 2 hours a month for a year to support a woman entrepreneur, because often it's having that help, that advice, that sounding board that can make all the difference to women entrepreneurs. We've been very lucky over the years with our partners like Bank of America, Qualcomm, various Marsh & McLennan, and companies often sponsor our pairing so that it's a great volunteering opportunity for their staff all over the world. But we've now just recently introduced a way where actually individuals can self-fund and can become accredited mentors and mentor as well. And all of that is on our website. And if anyone would like to have a real personal relationship with a woman in a low and middle income country, it's a great way to give something back.
I love that framing of for people watching, what's one thing that they can do. So I would love to leave people with that. If Carolyn and Sanda, if you have a final thought on that, I would love to hear that. I think that's a great takeaway. Thank you, Cherie.
I think that's a terrific takeaway. And one other final thought is within the time of COVID, what's really important to the people who buy our products, who work around us, who we serve, these issues, equality, sustainability, have become more important, not less important. And so, again, I'll plea to the business leaders out there. This is important for your employees. It's important for your consumers. It's important for all stakeholders. And this is really an opportunity to lead. And this is an opportunity to continue to do great things for the people that we serve and do great things for the world that we live in.
Thank you so much.
Mine would be,
yes, go ahead.
sorry, mine would be, I think we've spoken, and Cherie and the other speaker have certainly raised what the important issues are. I would just like to state that businesses also need to look at the unintended consequences. We haven't spoken about issues such as domestic violence, harassment in the workplace, loss of pay. It's an all-of-sectoral approach that we do need to look at. Income is a key parameter. There's a lot more softer issues. So we need to take a very broad approach to how we address gender and gender parity going forward.
Thank you all so much for this conversation. It's a really important topic, really big topic, and so I appreciate all of you coming and chatting with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before I go, I would like to highlight the Bloomberg Paycheck podcast. This season, we're doing a deep dive into the racial wealth gap in the U.S., hosted by me, Rebecca Greenfield, and Jackie Simmons, a senior executive editor at Bloomberg. We'll be playing a preview for you, and if you like what you hear, please head to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts to subscribe, rate, and review.
It's embarrassing, right? I can't have these conversations with everybody. I feel like there is no safe place for me to have this conversation because I'm going to get judged one way or another. It's a lot. I feel betrayed too. I don't know. And then to learn this year that I was overtaxed by $5,000, it makes me sad. It makes me depressed. It makes me feel like a failure.